I teach property law, which is usually a first-year law school class. It's a spring class at my school, so my students have just completed their first term. And every year I get a variation of this question at the beginning of the term. I didn't do as well as I would have liked in the fall. How can I do better? How do I study in law school? The first answer to this question is that you shouldn't be taking study advice from a law school professor. We're good at law, we're not good at educational theory, and there's a lot of research out there about study techniques that work, like self-testing and spaced repetition, and those that don't, like rereading notes and underlining. And here's a good popular summary of some of that research, and I'll link it and some other studies in the notes to this video. But I still like to have something to say to my students, and this video is my attempt to answer the question. It's partly based on what worked for me as a law student, so maybe what worked for me isn't going to work for you, but for what it's worth, here's my advice. Let's start with some basics. Success on law school exams is not just about memorizing rules and doctrines.
A photographic memory is of absolutely no use to you without the ability to analyze that vast mass of facts between your ears.
If you made it to law school, you're more than capable of memorizing stuff. So law professors are not interested in testing that skill. At least I'm not. That is way too much paper to read. What we need you to do is to apply rules and doctrines to new situations. That's what lawyers do. And that means identifying the relevant rules, applying them correctly, and sometimes even making novel arguments when no existing rule directly fits the problem. And that means understanding the concepts, doctrines, and rules you've learned at a deep enough level to know how to use them. And let's be clear about that challenge. The way to understand is to understand. Nothing more, nothing less. There's no shortcut. There's no weird trick. If you don't get what you're studying in class, you need to keep at it until you do. Preferably by talking to your professors. That's what we're here for. But it could also mean redoing the reading, looking at a treatise, a study guide, talking to your classmates or a study group or whatever. And then, once you have it, applying the right study technique to remember, to keep it, to know that it's there. But whatever you do, the tricky part is knowing when you actually get it. How do you do that? You do it the same way you learned how to tie your shoes, by doing the thing. That is, putting your understanding into action to see if it's actually there. You do this all the time in your everyday life. If you want to learn how to shoot a basketball, you don't memorize the steps or look at a diagram. Maybe you get a demonstration, but the way you learn is to do the thing. You test yourself and you hit your shot, or you don't, and you make the necessary adjustments, and you get better as you go. Just so with law. You learn legal concepts by using them. Now, it doesn't feel that way because using language doesn't feel like shooting a basketball, and it's hard to come by feedback as direct as making or missing a shot, but the idea is the same. And law is language, so you can put doctrine into words in ways that either make sense or don't. And it's this doing the thing that can tell you if you're understanding or if there's something that you're not getting. And it's doing that that gives your brain actual practice of the skills that you're going to be tested on. So when you test yourself, you're both testing yourself and you're strengthening the memory of what you're learning. Now, there's different ways of doing this. My favorite way to study in law school was to get together with friends and look at any old exams we could find, or absent that, problems in commercial outlines or the like, and talk them out. And I would realize whether I got something or not only by whether I got the quote-unquote right answer, but whether or not I could explain that answer to my friends in a way that made sense to them and in a way that made sense to me. Now, there's other ways of doing this, and there are ways you can do this during the term. Try explaining what you've learned out loud without looking at your notes. Can you do it? And if you don't want to talk to yourself, call your parents, call a loved one, call a friend. They'd love to hear from you. This works. Now, if you don't want to believe me about this stuff, listen to Cal Newport. He's like the productivity guru. He's a smart guy. He's written books about this subject, and here's what he has to say about it.
The only way to learn new information that actually works with any sort of effectiveness is trying to produce the information out loud from your own brain as if lecturing a class without looking at notes. That's how you learn things. The opposite of that is passive recall, which is where you read your highlighted notes. That is an incredibly inefficient way of learning stuff.
Likewise, former students who've aced my exams have told me that they use similar techniques to study for their finals. Finally, as I said earlier, there's research that testing to learn works better than just rereading your textbooks or your notes. One of these studies even indicates that the practice of trying to remember something that you've read feels less effective, maybe because it's hard, than simply rereading the materials over and over again, but the practice of trying to recall things, of testing yourself, actually works a lot better. Now, let's be clear. Active learning is mentally taxing. It'll make you tired, and it's a lot of work. That's why people don't like to do it. But I think it actually really works, and if someone asks me for advice about what they should do to study, that's my advice. And there's always opportunities for active engagement. When some poor soul in your class gets cold called on, can you answer their question in your head? When you're reading, are you just highlighting, or are you writing notes that identify what matters and why, that explain it to you for later? When you take notes in class, are you just being a stenographer, or are you actively recoding what you're hearing into something that reflects actual understanding? Finally, 3 other semi-related things about being in class. First, you can't rely on whether you quote-unquote get the professor's lecture to know if you really understand. Presumably, your professor's lecture is going to make sense, and if your professor is a good lecturer, they'll be relatively easy to nod along to. So when they ask any questions, you may not have any. This is the really dangerous moment for your studies. Just because you've nodded along doesn't mean that you understand any more than watching someone demonstrate a dance step means that you'd be able to do it yourself. You may feel like you're getting it, but maybe you aren't. That's why testing yourself is so important. Second, remember that it's your professor's job to answer your questions. If you have them after class is done and your professor is still there at the podium, don't wait. Go talk to them. And if you or they have to go, get to the soonest office hours that you possibly can. The sooner you ask, the fresher and clearer your questions are going to be. And waiting for the end of the term runs the risk that you're going to forget what was confusing you, and you'll miss out on all the opportunities along the way to reinforce the understanding that you're missing out on today. And of course, the lowest hanging fruit of all is to shut off your internet and put your phone away in class. Context switching is going to get in the way of your ability to pay attention and actually retain anything that you're hearing. Again, this stuff is hard and you need your full brain for it. That's all I got. Good luck with your studies this term.